That had been 3 hours ago. Now the ardent line was gone, and the space where it had existed was marked only by debris signatures and cooling radiation. Ilara remembered the voice, not the name. She filed that away with the others. Across the bridge, the casualty feed updated in steady intervals. Numbers rising, flattening briefly, then rising again. The rhythm of attrition. Each increment represented something specific. Crew compartments breached, life support failures, direct hits that left no time for anything else. She read the numbers the way she read all data. Precisely. Without hesitation. There were too many to hold individually. That was not failure. It was capacity. Deck 12 reports partial decompression, said Elwaya, the operations officer. Bulkheads holding. Casualties still coming in. Stabilize what you can, Ilara said. Alar nodded, already issuing the commands. Behind the numbers, there were people. She knew that. She had always known that. It had been part of her training, part of the doctrine drilled into every command officer. Never lose sight of what your ships carry. But doctrine also taught something else. You could not carry all of it at once. She allowed herself one memory. Not from the battle. From before. A small room on a neutral station, years ago. Representatives from 40 systems gathered around a table too large for any one species to claim. The air had been thick with translation overlays and cautious optimism. The accord had been signed that day. An attack on one is an attack on all. She remembered the moment the final seal had been placed. The quiet that followed, not from uncertainty, but from something that felt, at the time, like relief. They had believed it. Not blindly. Not without debate or dissent. But enough. Enough to build fleets around it. Enough to plan strategies that assumed it would hold. Ilara had shaken hands with commanders who now existed only as entries in the casualty feed. She had shared meals with them. Argued tactics. Learned the cadence of their speech, the small differences in how they approached the same problem. She had known them. Now she knew their absence. Commander, the comm officer said, voice tight despite their effort to keep it level. Incoming request from the virile remnants. They're asking for permission to disengage and fall back behind our line. Ilara looked at the display. The virile ships were holding a position that had already been compromised. Their formation was thinning, their shield signatures unstable. If they withdrew, the gap would widen. If they stayed, they would be destroyed. Both outcomes led to the same conclusion. The only difference was timing. Authorize withdrawal, she said. The comm officer hesitated. That will expose our flank. Yes, Ilara said. The pause. Understood. The message was sent. On the display, the virile ships broke formation, turning in coordinated arcs away from the Dominion advance. For a moment, it looked clean. Controlled. Then the Dominion adjusted. 2 virile vessels were caught mid-turn, their trajectories intersecting with incoming fire. They vanished almost simultaneously. The remaining ships accelerated, escaping the immediate kill zone, but not the battle. Ilara marked their new positions. They would not last long. Update Accord response status, she said. The comm officer didn't need to check. No change. No inbound signals. No fleet signatures. Repeat the broadcast. We've been transmitting continuously. Repeat it anyway. The beat. Yes, Commander. The message went out again, carried across every available frequency. A formal request for reinforcement under the terms of the Accord. Precise. Unambiguous. Logged in 17 languages, with full authentication protocols attached. Ilara listened to the opening line as it played over the internal feed. This is Commander Ilara Ven of the Halcyon Reach. We are under sustained assault in the Cauldron Expanse. Requesting immediate support under Accord Article 1. She had heard it dozens of times already. It sounded different each time. Not because the words changed, but because the context did. The first time, it had carried expectation. Now it carried record. Commander, Terran said quietly. Permission to speak freely. She glanced at him. Granted. He kept his eyes on the display. They're not coming. It was not said with bitterness. Not even with anger. Just a statement. Ilara considered it for a moment, not because she disagreed, but because it deserved the space of consideration. No, she said. They're not. Taryn nodded once, as if something had settled into place. Across the bridge, the crew continued their work. Adjusting vectors, redistributing power, managing systems that were failing in predictable ways. No one stopped. That was the part she would remember later. Not the moment of realization. Not the absence of response. The continuation. They kept doing their jobs. Commander, Thar said, we've lost contact with the Kirill command ship. No escape signatures detected. Ilara closed her eyes for half a second. Open them. Mark it. Yes, Commander. The number climbed again. She let it. Through the viewport, a cluster of escape pods drifted past, their beacons blinking steadily. Small, fragile things against the scale of the battle. For a moment, the Dominion ignored them. Then a secondary formation shifted. The pods vanished from the display. Ilara watched it happen. She did not comment. There was nothing to add. Responsive, neutral, out of range. The column of responses grew longer than the column of names that mattered. Ilara watched it for a moment. Then she looked away. Commander, Taryn said, we're getting internal requests from Allied ships. They want their time to full engagement, she asked. 22 minutes, Taryn replied. She nodded. That was shorter than before. It would continue to shorten. Time, like everything else in the system, was being consumed. Had signed the accord. 17 had already fallen to the Dominion. 9 were too distant to respond in time, even if they chose to. Losses included. Specific acknowledgments. Of course they did. The living always wanted the dead to be seen clearly. Summarize by fleet, Ilara said. No individual names. The pause. That won't satisfy them. No, she agreed. It won't. But it was what they had. Add a closing statement, she said. The comm officer looked up. Content. Ilara didn't answer immediately. She stepped away from the console, just far enough to look at the bridge as a whole. The crew at their stations. The steady movement of hands across controls. The quiet discipline of people who had already accepted something and were continuing anyway. She turned back. State that we held position at Cauldron Expanse for the duration of the engagement, she said. State the total time. 11 hours and counting, Taryn said. Then state it as ongoing, Ilara replied. The comm officer nodded, typing. Add that the line did not break. A small shift moved through the room at that. Not relief. Not pride. Recognition. Yes, Commander, they said. Ilara returned to her position. Final review in 5 minutes, she said. Then we transmit. The clock on the display ticked down. 15 minutes to full engagement. Outside, the Dominion formation adjusted again, tightening its approach vectors. The second wave was settling into position, its geometry precise and unhurried. They were not rushing. They did not need to. Commander, Thar said quietly. Do we include tone? Ilara glanced at her. Explain. Do we make it formal? Diplomatic? Ilara considered the question. What tone did a final record require? What weight did words need to carry when they might be the only thing left? No, she said. We make it accurate. Lyr nodded. Accuracy required no decoration. Draft ready for review, the comm officer said. Ilara stepped closer, reading the text as it scrolled. It was clean. It said what had happened. It did not say how it felt. That was correct. Any objections? She asked. No one spoke. Not because there were none. Because there was no time to voice them. Then we transmit, Ilara said. The comm officer's hand hovered over the control. On your mark, Commander. Ilara looked at the display one more time. The fleet. What remained of it? The line they were holding. Mark, she said. The transmission went out. A pulse of data spreading in every direction, carrying with it the shape of the battle. The numbers. The times. The absence where something should have been. It moved at the speed of light. Too fast to follow. Too slow to matter here. Transmission confirmed, the comm officer said. Ilara nodded once. That part is done. No one responded. There was nothing to add. On the tactical display, the Dominion second wave completed its formation. Weapons systems aligned. Vectors locked. 14 minutes, Terran said. Ilara placed her hands on the console again. Steady. She noticed that. Then she looked at the incoming force. The record had been sent. What remained was execution. They would hold. For as long as the math allowed. And then, when the math finished, they would become part of the record they had just created. The second line did not break the way lines were supposed to break. It did not shatter under force. It did not collapse in a clean cascade of tactical failure. It held and then it loosened. Like something that had been pulled too tight for too long and had finally slipped one fraction of a measure beyond the point where it could return to its original shape. Shreth saw it in the delays. Not in the ships themselves. Not at first. The ships still moved where they were ordered to move. They still fired when commanded. They still held formation in the broad sense. But inside those actions, inside the spaces between input and execution, something had changed. A half-second hesitation. A targeting solution recalculated twice when once had always been enough. A shield redistribution that came a moment too late because the officer executing it had watched a human ship do something that did not fit into the expected pattern and had tried, for just an instant, to understand it. That instant was the gap. The gap was growing. They are inside the timing window, Taith said. His voice was still controlled. It always was. But there was a new layer under it now, something that had not been present at the start of the engagement. Not fear exactly. Not yet. They are forcing engagements before we complete response cycles. Shreth did not answer immediately. She was watching a cluster of human destroyers peel away from the main advance vector, not in a coordinated arc, not as part of a flanking maneuver she could map, but individually, each one choosing a slightly different angle, a slightly different speed, a slightly different target. It should have been inefficient. It should have been messy. It should have been easy to counter. Instead, it was creating interference. Each ship forcing a separate response. Each response interfering with the next. Each interference widening the gap. They are not optimizing, Taith said. Shreth almost corrected him. They were optimizing. Just not in any way her models could recognize. Adjust targeting priorities, she said. Focus fire on the outer units. Collapse their spread. Taith executed the command instantly. On the display, ascendancy batteries shifted. Precision volleys reached out, catching two of the human destroyers mid-vector. One vanished cleanly. The other broke apart in a flare of debris and venting atmosphere. The remaining ships did not react. They did not tighten formation. They did not compensate in any recognizable way. They continued. They are ignoring losses, Taith said. No, Shreth said quietly. They are incorporating them. She watched as the space left by the destroyed ships was not filled, not corrected, but used. The remaining vessels flowed into the new geometry as if it had always been intended. As if the loss had been part of the design. She ran the calculation again. The model struggled. Variables refused to stabilize. Outcomes shifted depending on assumptions she could not verify. She adjusted for morale degradation. The result did not change enough. She adjusted for command latency. Still not enough. She added a provisional variable, something undefined, something she could not quantify but could no longer ignore. The model rejected it. There is no coherence, Taith said. No central command pattern. No predict. Prepare a full casualty projection, she said. Terran hesitated. Commander, I know what it will say. He looked at her, searching for something, permission, perhaps, or contradiction. He found neither. Yes, Commander, he said, and began the calculation. Ilara turned her attention back to the wider display. 40 systems. For had declared neutrality in carefully worded transmissions that avoided direct refusal while achieving the same effect. That left 10. 10 systems that could have answered. 10 that had not. She did not assign motive. Not yet. Calculation. Self-preservation. All valid. All irrelevant to the current engagement. What about Earth? Ilara asked, not looking up from her station. The question landed differently. It always did. Ilara considered the data. Last confirmed signal was 9 days ago. No response since. They were one of the first to ratify the accord, Ilara said. Yes. They built half the logistical network we're using. Yes. The pause. Do you think? No, Ilara said. Ilara didn't finish the question. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things not said. Assumptions. Expectations. The slow recognition that those expectations no longer applied. Ilara returned to the display. A cruiser on the far edge of the formation broke apart under concentrated fire, its core going critical in a brief, contained flare of light. For an instant, the debris field illuminated the surrounding ships, casting sharp reflections across their hulls. Then it was gone. Casualty projection complete, Taryn said. Ilara didn't ask him to read it. She already knew. Send it to my display, she said. The data appeared, clean and precise. She scanned it once. Then she dismissed it. Commander, the comm officer said, we're receiving internal requests from multiple ships. They want confirmation on fallback protocols. A structured withdrawal. A controlled collapse designed to preserve as much of the fleet as possible. It required coordination. It required time. It required space. They had none of those things. Deny, Ilara said. The comm officer blinked. All of them? Yes. The beat? Yes, Commander. The responses went out. Across the fleet, ships adjusted, not away from the enemy, but into more stable positions. Closing gaps. Reinforcing weak points. Choosing, collectively, to remain. Ilara watched the shift happen. No speeches. No declarations. Just compliance. They would hold. Not because it would change the outcome, but because it was the only instruction that still meant anything. 17 minutes, Taryn said. Ilara rested her hands on the console again. Still steady. She noted that. Then she looked at the Dominion advance, at the precise, inevitable movement of a force that understood exactly what it was doing and had no reason to doubt it. She thought briefly of the accord, of the promise it had represented, of the systems that had signed it, of the silence that had followed. She did not feel anger. Not yet. There would be time for that later. If later existed. For now, there was only the work. And the line they had chosen to hold. The decision to make a record came quietly. Not as an announcement. Not as a command issued across the bridge. It arrived the way certain conclusions did, already formed, waiting only to be acknowledged. Ilara was looking at the casualty projection again when she spoke. We begin a final transmission, she said. No one asked what she meant. Taryn nodded once, as if he had been expecting it. Full spectrum. Yes. All channels. Tight beam and wide broadcast. The comm officer straightened slightly. Content. Ilara did not answer immediately. She watched the tactical display for another few seconds, tracking the slow compression of their defensive line. Then she said, everything. The pause. Commander. What we held. How long we held it. Fleet composition. Losses. The terms of the accord and the response we received. Taryn glanced at her. You want it explicit? Yes. There was no edge in her voice. No emphasis. Just clarity. The comm officer began preparing the transmission framework, routing it through every available system. Backup relays came online. Translation matrices spun up, cycling through languages and dialects. 17 languages? They asked. 17, Ilara confirmed. Include full translation packets. Across the bridge, the work shifted. It was still the same work. Systems, targeting, damage control, but now there was something else layered over it. A second track running parallel to the battle. Documentation. Commander, Ilara said. Should we include individual ship logs? No, Ilara said. Summary only. We don't have time for detail. That was the truth of it. Detail required time. Reflection. The ability to pause. They had none of those. Opening line? The comm officer asked. Ilara considered it. Not the words themselves. Those were simple. But what they would carry. How they would be read by whoever found them, whenever that might be. She spoke slowly. This is Commander Ilara Venn of the Halcyon Reach. This transmission is a record of the Cauldron Expanse engagement. The comm officer typed, the words appearing on shared displays across the bridge. Continue. We engaged Dominion forces at 0400 local cycle. Initial fleet strength, 412 vessels across 6 systems. Current operational capacity. She stopped. Not because she didn't know the number. Because saying it out loud would fix it in a way that internal acknowledgement did not. Continue, Terran said quietly. Ilara resumed. Current operational capacity is below 40% and declining. The words settled into the record. Unadorned. Include time markers for major losses, she added. The Ardent Line. The Kirill Command Ship. Cauldron Station. Yes, Commander. The list grew. Each entry a point in time. A moment where something had existed, and then had not. Add the Accord reference, Ilara said. The comm officer nodded. Article 1? Yes. Full text. They pulled it from the archive, the familiar phrasing appearing on the screen. An attack on one signatory will be met with unified response from all signatories, without delay or reservation. Ilara read it once. Then she said, append response status. The comm officer hesitated. Commander. Append it. The beat. Yes, Commander. They began typing. Request for reinforcement transmitted at 0412 local cycle. Acknowledged by Accord Network. No fleet response received as of transmission time. The words looked different when written. Less abstract. More permanent. Do we name individual systems? Boarist. Ilara considered it. This was where language became particular. Where accuracy and intent intersected. Yes, she said. List all signatories. Mark response status. That will take time, Ilara finished. We have 17 minutes. Silence. Then LYR nodded. Understood. The list began to populate. System names. One after another. Beside each, a status. Fallen. None. Able structure. Shref looked at the display for a long moment. No, she said. There is structure. Then identify it, Taith said, and there was the first edge of frustration in his voice now. We cannot counter what we cannot model.
Shreth did not respond, because she was beginning to understand that the problem was not that the structure was hidden. The problem was that the structure was not where she was looking. Another human cruiser broke from the main line. This one was intact, undamaged, fully shielded. It accelerated past ships that were already engaged, moving deeper than it should, farther than any doctrine would allow without support. It is overextending, Taith said immediately. Yes, Shreth said. They both watched. Ascendancy batteries pivoted, locking onto the cruiser as it crossed into optimal firing range. The targeting solution resolved in fractions of a second. Fire. The volley hit.
Clean.
Devastating. The cruiser's shields collapsed under the impact. Hull integrity dropped sharply. Its trajectory wavered, and then stabilized. It did not pull back. It did not slow. It pushed forward.
Why?
Taith asked, and this time the question was not rhetorical. Shreth did not answer. Because she did not know. Because the answer was not in the numbers. The cruiser reached the midpoint between the two lines before it fired. Not at the nearest target. Not at the most vulnerable. At a point. Empty space. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then 3 Ascendancy ships lost sensor cohesion simultaneously. Not destroyed. Blinded. Targeting arrays scrambled. Communication links disrupted. Formation data desynchronized. They are creating their own openings, Taith said, his voice tightening despite himself. Yes. The human cruiser disintegrated under the next volley. But the opening remained. And through it, the rest of the fleet advanced. Shreth felt it then. Not in the data. In herself. A shift.
Small.
Precise. Dangerous.
Doubt.
She ran the calculation again. more carefully than before. The answer came back. It was consistent. It was logical. It was wrong. She knew it was wrong because reality was no longer aligning with it. And if the model did not match reality, then the model was no longer a tool. It was a liability.
Taith, she said.
Yes, Commander. Reduce reliance on predictive modeling. There was a pause. A small one, but it was there. For which systems? He asked. All of them. Another pause. Longer this time. That will degrade coordination efficiency by. I know what it will do. Silence. Then quietly, understood. Orders propagated. Across the Ascendancy fleet, systems adjusted. Predictive overlays dimmed. Automated response chains shortened. Officers were forced back into direct control, into immediate decision-making without the full support of the models they had trained with their entire careers. The effect was immediate. Response times improved.
Slightly.
Hesitations shortened. Fractionally. But something else happened too. The certainty was gone. The clean, quiet confidence that had defined every movement of the fleet since the engagement began to erode. And, in its place,
noise.
Not chaos. Not yet. But noise. On the display, the human fleet did not change. It did not need to. It had never been relying on that layer of certainty to begin with. They are still accelerating, Taith said. Shreth nodded. She could see it. The center of the human advance was not just holding speed. It was increasing. They are committing fully, he added. No, Shreth said softly. They already did. She watched as the distance between the two fleets collapsed further. As the engagements became closer, more chaotic, more immediate. As the space between decision and consequence shrank. This was where discipline mattered most. This was where ascendancy doctrine had always excelled. And yet, they are faster, Taith said. Not in speed. In action. In choice. In the space between stimulus and response, the humans were moving first. Again.
And again. And again.
Shreth understood then. Not completely. Not cleanly. But enough. They were not winning because they were stronger. They were not winning because they were more numerous. They were winning because they were not waiting. Not for confirmation. Not for certainty. Not for the model to resolve. They were acting. And in acting, they were forcing the ascendancy to react. And in reacting, the ascendancy was always behind. The gap widened. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But steadily. Relentlessly. Inevitably. Commander, Taith said. She looked at him. For the first time, he said carefully, I cannot project a stable outcome. Shreth held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the display. At the human fleet. At the line that had not stopped. At the patterns she could not map. At the variables she could not define. Yes, she said. I know.
5.
The end did not announce itself. There was no moment where the battle declared its conclusion. No signal that separated what was still in motion from what had already begun to settle. It thinned instead. Quietly. Gradually. The way exhaustion replaces adrenaline, without asking permission. Shreth felt it before she could point to it. Not in the ships. In the rhythm. The engagement had a tempo. Every battle did. A structure made of action and response, pressure and adjustment, force applied and redirected. For hours, that rhythm had been tight, controlled, exact. Now it was uneven. Not broken. Just off. Reports came in as they always had. Losses, positions, system failures, minor recoveries, momentary advantages that did not hold. The data stream was steady. Continuous. But underneath it, something had shifted. The certainty that had carried the ascendancy through every previous engagement was no longer present in the same way. It had not vanished. It had thinned. Forward line integrity at 62%, Taith said. His voice was still precise. Still controlled. But it required more effort now. Secondary line holding. For how long? Shreth asked. A pause. Not because he did not have the data. Because the data did not have the answer. I cannot determine a stable duration. Shreth nodded once. She did not look at him. She did not need to. On the display, The human fleet continued its advance. Not recklessly, not blindly, but without hesitation. That was the part that mattered. They were not accelerating anymore. They did not need to. The distance was already gone. Now it was close engagement. Now it was decision without delay. Now it was where the difference lived. An ascendancy cruiser broke formation. Not ordered, not planned. A fractional drift out of position to avoid a collision vector that had not existed a moment before. The ship corrected immediately, but the correction created space. The humans moved into it before it closed. A destroyer followed, then another. The line did not collapse. It loosened, and once loosened, it could not hold the same way again. "They are inside the structure," Taith said. Yes. No elaboration. None was needed. Shreth watched as one of her heavy ships, an anchor point in the secondary line, took concentrated fire from 3 different vectors. The targeting was imperfect, individually inefficient, collectively effective. Shields failed. Hull integrity dropped. The ship did not retreat. It held. It returned fire. It followed doctrine exactly. And it died exactly the way doctrine predicted it would under those conditions.
Clean.
Expected.
Correct.
Shreth recorded the loss, noted it, placed it in the structure of the engagement, and felt, distantly, that the structure itself was no longer sufficient to hold what was happening.
Taith, she said.
Yes, Commander. Status of the Wrath Boss. Operational. Damage at 38%. Mobility reduced. Weapons at 71% efficiency. It was still a dominant presence on the field. Still capable. Still dangerous. But no longer untouchable. Nothing was untouchable anymore. Shreth looked at the center. At the place that had been certain. At the place that had always held. The humans were there now. Not around it. Not threatening it. Inside it. She ran the calculation again. She knew what it would say. She ran it anyway. The answer resolved.
Clear.
Precise. Useless. Because it described a battle that was no longer being fought.
Taith, she said.
Yes. Order a full withdrawal to System Edge. Silence. Not long, but real. A decision of that scale always carried weight. Even here. Even now. Confirm, he said quietly. Full withdrawal? Yes. No hesitation. No adjustment. No attempt to salvage position. The calculation had failed. And without the calculation, the engagement no longer had a shape she could control. Orders propagated. Across the fleet, ships disengaged. Not all at once. Not cleanly. The rear guard held. The forward elements fell back under pressure. Losses increased during the transition. That was expected. That was acceptable. What mattered was that the structure reformed. That the retreat had shape. That it did not become collapse. They are pursuing, Taith said. Shreth watched the human fleet. They followed. Of course they followed. But not blindly. Not beyond the boundary. They pressed until the edge of the system. And then, they stopped. They're holding position, Taith said. There was something in his voice now that had not been there before. Not confusion. Not fear. Something closer to recognition. Shreth studied the display. The human fleet remained at the threshold. Not advancing. Not withdrawing. Present. Deliberate. Controlled. They are not overextending, he added. No, Shreth said. They are finished. The word settled between them. Not defeat. Not destruction. Finished. The distinction mattered. The Ascendancy fleet still existed. Still functional. Still capable of future engagement. But this battle, this engagement, was complete. Shreth stood in silence for a long moment. She reviewed the data, the losses, the timings, the decisions, the places where the model had held, the places where it had failed, and the space between those things. They did not break us, Taith said. It was not a question. It was an observation. No, Shreth agreed. They did not need to. Another pause. What were they doing, he asked. This time, she answered. Not immediately. But she answered. They were removing certainty. Taith did not respond. He was looking at the display. At the human fleet. at the line that had come straight through the center of something that was not supposed to be penetrable, at the ships that had taken losses and kept moving, at the pattern that had never resolved into something predictable. They changed the conditions, he said slowly. Yes. And we continued to operate as if the conditions were the same. Yes. The realization settled. Not sudden. Not sharp. Heavy. Shreth turned away from the display. Begin full post-engagement analysis, she said. Flag all anomalies. All of it is an anomaly, Taith said before he could stop himself. A small silence followed. Then more controlled. Understood. He began issuing the orders. Shreth did not look back at the display immediately. When she did, the human fleet was still there. At the edge. Holding.
Not advancing.
Not threatening. Not leaving. Just present. As if to say, this far. No further. She studied that for a long moment. Then she turned away. There would be other battles. Other engagements. Other calculations. And next time,
she would account for this.
Or she would try. Behind her, the system settled. Debris drifted. Fires died. Signals quieted. The war for this place moved into its next state. Not ended. Never ended. Just changed. And somewhere in the data logs, among the millions of lines of precise, structured information, there would be a gap. A place where the model had not matched reality. A place where something new had entered the equation. Something without a name.
Yet.